Hello, welcome to this video looking at clause 8.1 operational planning and control. So this video we're looking at clause 8.1 of 9001 and 27001, and firstly we're looking at 27001. So just to point out, there are some similarities and some distinct differences between the two clauses, but broadly it's possible to treat them in one video. So let's proceed. And the organization shall plan, implement and control the processes needed to meet information security requirements and to implement the actions determined in 6.1, which is all about risk assessment and risk treatment and so on. And the organization shall also implement plans to achieve information security objectives determined in clause 6.2. Very important that you keep that in mind. Excuse me. The second piece of criteria: the organization shall keep documented information to the extent necessary to have confidence that the processes have been carried out as planned. It's important to understand that in this particular standard, it's a very high level view, and it leaves that autonomy of the organization for them to decide for itself where it needs to provide documented support. Thirdly, the organization shall control planned changes and review the consequences of unintended changes, taking action to mitigate any adverse effects as necessary. So for information security, there's a big focus on system change and changes to access requirements and so on. And that's largely dealt with through the statement of applicability. But I think you've got to keep in mind that we're considering all of those actions that come out of clause 6.1 and 6.2. In this particular standard, there's no clause 6.3 in correlation with 9001. So it brings plan changes into this area of planning and control of relevant operations. So it's just to keep that in mind. Lastly, the organization shall ensure that outsourced processes are determined and controlled. So we can look back to interested parties register, determining contractual arrangements, requirements to service that particular relationship, the issues that arise out of the relationship and so on. And all of that has to be brought in via your risk assessment and risk treatment through clause 6.1. So while this standard references clause 6.1 and 6.2, through clause 6.1, it brings in contextual issues and requirements of interested parties and so on, where issues have arisen through that analysis that needed to be risk assessed and treated accordingly. So keeping all that in mind, let's go and look at ISO 9001. So we're at the same clause, but this is a little bit more detailed. Forgive the fact that it's spread over 2 pages, but let's go down through the criteria quickly so that we can get a handle on it. So firstly, the organization shall plan, implement and control processes. Here it makes a reference to clause 4.4, where Enable ISO customers will remember that in the scope statement, in response to clause 4.4, we provided some high level detail for all of the processes that are included in the management system. So, where we've documents those processes in the scope statement, and then subsequently what it's asking us to do here is to now flesh it out in the detail that you need to make sure that it's effective. So here we go. Number one, you've got to bring all the stuff in from clause 4.4, but then secondly, here's the thing that you've got to think about from clause 6 is in ISO 27001, it mentioned clause 6.1 and 6.2 specifically. Here it just says clause 6, the entirety of clause 6, which includes planning of changes as well. So refer back to my reference where I mentioned that the absence of that in the ISO 27001 standard. So here, for the second paragraph in ISO 27001, where it says, provide the documented support to the extent necessary, here it goes a little bit further and it requires you to do particular things. It doesn't say how you're to do them, but it says that they need to be done. Okay, so provision of products and service, and to implement the actions determined in clause 6 by A, determining the requirements for the products and services. B, establishing criteria for, one, the processes, and two, the acceptance of products and services. That's important, but combine that then with C, which says determining the resources needed to achieve conformity to products and service requirements. You can see why they go together. You know, the output of one provides input into the second, really. D, implementing control of the processes in accordance with the criteria. I think you've got to put the quality and the information security cap on at this point, because you know, as the total management system has been set up in such a way that it's an integrated system, it looks after multiple attributes or aspects in one flow. So you would never leave the information security aside while you're thinking about quality. E, determining, maintaining and retaining documented information to the extent necessary. One, to have confidence that the processes have been carried out as planned, and two, to demonstrate the conformity of products and services to their requirements. So determining, maintaining and retaining documented information. Yeah, okay, so I think what you've got to consider when you combine this criteria together is that you're setting out what the KPIs are, but you're also going to set the minimum criteria for acceptance. So it may be that there are tolerances that come out of negotiations with customers, likewise with your supply chain. So who keeps an eye on those measures and controls inputs and outputs of the processes? How then does reporting happen? And how do you record everything so that management have access to vital information when decisions need to be made? I think Enable ISO customers will be aware of the application of the process risk register at this point, because all of the criteria that's been asked for throughout this particular clause should be documented as you develop your processes across the criteria in the various columns of the process risk register. So keep that in mind when your auditor is asking you to respond to this criteria. It's the process risk register that brings all of it together. And so, you know, if there is a contextual issue or, you know, an information security asset that's considered to be under particular risk, where it's the exposure to threat is maximized because of a particular activity, well, it's the process risk register will deal with that risk. And it's very important that operational planning and control considers the mitigations and the effectiveness of mitigations and what's, you know, what you need to make people aware of, for example, with regard to residual risk and risk ownership. Likewise with quality controls, you know, there's all auditors will be aware and all business owners will be aware that, you know, you can put as many technical controls in place as you like from a planning perspective, but when you actually execute the operation, human error is a big factor. And training can only go a certain amount of the way, probably only halfway, toward mitigating that residual risk of human error. And it's the biggest area of failure outside of technical controls. And so just something to be aware of. I think if I scroll a little bit here, just to give us a better view of the last piece of criteria. And it says here, the output of this planning shall be suitable for the organization's operations. So you can see, again, it's leaving the extent of the documentation and it's leaving the autonomy for considering the application of that criteria with the organization. So it's up to the organization then to be able to demonstrate to the auditor that they've gone to that extent. And then, like with 27001, you know, it looks at the organization shall control plan changes. So it brings in planning of changes considered under clause 6.3 and review the consequences of unintended changes, taking action to mitigate any adverse effects. So we've already discussed this in previous videos. Enable ISO customers will be aware of our approach as we, you know, take you through the consultancy and the different programs. And we're very pro determining objectives early on so that you can plan them into your processes at this point. Keeping in mind that an organization should consider itself to be at every step of the life cycle. We're only looking at one part of that life cycle at the moment. So I think with that in mind, I'll refer you back then to the process risk register. One of the things that's kind of a frustration of auditors when we go in is that when it comes to that requirement for documented information, we find that people may have over-responded, and many times they go into meticulous detail into every little thing that needs to be considered in the process. And really, that's not what ISO is all about. It's, really it's about the journey of the customer through the business. And likewise for 27001, you would consider the journey of the data through the business, their data through the business. So what you've got to keep in mind is, bringing the documentation to a level where you are assured that you've gone to the extent necessary. And if you can demonstrate that it's working for you, an auditor can accept that. There is no requirement for going into meticulous detail unless you as an organization feel and have made that decision that there's value in that for you. If nobody reads these documents except for auditors, well, there's really very little point in having them on the management system. Okay, that's me for now. Take care.